Julius Caesar, dead at 56, never tasted tomato sauce, not once. Cleopatra, the most powerful woman in the ancient world, never saw a tomato in her entire life. For 1,000 years, Romans built the most sophisticated cuisine on earth without this single ingredient. And when it finally reached Europe, people believed it would kill them. Wealthy aristocrats ate tomatoes at elaborate dinners. Then they died. This is the true story of how a fruit from 3,000 miles away transformed into Italy's national identity. And the truth is darker than anyone told you. Close your eyes. Picture Italian food. You see red sauce, pizza, pasta drowning in tomato. That image is burned into your brain. It defines Italy. But here's the problem. That entire image is a lie from history. Not one of those dishes existed in ancient Rome. Zero. The Roman Empire lasted over 1,000 years. They conquered most of the known world, but they never encountered the ingredient their descendants would build their cuisine around. This wasn't because Romans were primitive. It's because tomatoes were growing on the other side of the world, in a land they didn't know existed. But when tomatoes finally arrived in Europe in the 1500s, something shocking happened. Europeans refused to eat them for 200 years. They called them poison apples, and people died trying to prove them wrong. So how did Romans create bold, complex flavors without tomatoes? The answer is genius. They used garum. Garum was fermented fish sauce made from fish guts, salt, and herbs. You layer fish intestines with salt in massive clay pots. Leave them in the Mediterranean sun for months. The mixture ferments into a brown liquid. Pliny the Elder claimed it smelled like the finest perfume. Every Roman kitchen had it. Garum did everything tomatoes would later do. It added umami, that deep, savory richness. Romans combined it with wine for acid, honey for sweetness, and herbs for complexity. The system worked perfectly for a millennium. Archaeologists found garum jars in common homes in Pompeii. Factories stretched across the Mediterranean. Trade routes carried millions of gallons to military camps in Britain. Soldiers received garum in their rations. It was that essential. Marcus Gavius Apicius wrote Rome's most famous cookbook, 400 recipes. Not one mentions tomatoes, because he didn't have a word for them. They didn't exist in his world. Romans also used silphium, a mysterious plant resin valued more than gold. A tiny bit could flavor an entire dish. The problem? Romans harvested it to extinction by the 1st century. It's gone forever. No one alive knows what it tasted like. Roman cuisine was sophisticated, balanced, and spectacular without tomatoes. They didn't wait for America to be discovered. They built their flavor system with what they had. Now jump 3,000 miles west, the Valley of Mexico. The year is 1400. The Aztec Empire controls millions of people from their island capital, Tenochtitlan. The city sits in the middle of a vast lake. Aztecs grow food on chinampas, floating gardens built from mud and reeds scraped from the lake bottom. Chinampas were one of the most efficient farming systems ever invented, 7 harvests per year, and one of the crops they grew was called tomatal. Aztecs didn't just eat tomatoes, they mastered them. They cultivated different varieties, combined them with chili peppers to create sauces that defined their cuisine. Tomatoes were fundamental to their diet. For thousands of years, these two culinary worlds existed in total isolation. Rome built its empire on garum and wine. Aztecs perfected tomatoes and chilies. Neither knew the other existed. Then, in 1492, Christopher Columbus landed in the Caribbean. He was searching for a trade route to Asia. Instead, he triggered the most significant food exchange in human history. After Hernán Cortés captured Tenochtitlan in 1521, Spanish ships began carrying New World foods to Europe. Tomatoes were among them, but they arrived with 0 instructions. Europeans had never seen anything like them. They didn't know which part to eat. They didn't know how to prepare them, and they had every reason to be suspicious. In 1544, Italian herbalist Pietro Andrea Mattioli wrote about tomatoes, but he didn't call them food. He classified them as nightshade, the same family as deadly nightshade, which contains toxins that cause hallucinations, paralysis, and death. Europeans looked at tomatoes and saw death berries, small, growing like berries on poisonous plants. So herbalists assumed tomatoes must be poisonous too. Guilt by association. By 1548, tomatoes appeared in the household of Cosimo de' Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany. But he wasn't eating them. Italian nobility used them as table decorations. They called them palme d'oro, golden apples. Beautiful to look at, too dangerous to eat. Medieval medicine made it worse. The ancient Galenic system classified all foods by 4 qualities: hot, cold, wet, and dry. Tomatoes got the worst classification possible: cold and wet. Medical texts declared them dangerous with the highest degree of coldness. But the real story gets stranger, because some Europeans did eat tomatoes, and some died. By the 1700s, tomatoes earned a terrifying nickname: the poison apple. Wealthy aristocrats would eat tomatoes at elaborate dinners. Then they'd get sick. Some died. The culprit seemed obvious: the tomatoes. Except it wasn't. The real killer was their plates. European aristocrats dined on pewter plates containing high levels of lead. Tomatoes are extremely acidic. When you put acidic food on lead-containing pewter, the acid leaches lead from the plate. People weren't dying from tomatoes. They were dying from lead poisoning. But no one made that connection. It was easier to blame the strange new food from the Americas. The tomato's reputation was destroyed for 2 centuries. Despite the fear, tomatoes slowly crept into European cuisine. Spain was first. By the early 1600s, tomatoes were definitely being eaten in Spain. Italy came next. The first Italian cookbook mentioning tomatoes appeared in 1692, but it didn't recommend using tomato sauce with pasta. That connection wouldn't happen for another century. France was worse. The French saw tomatoes as diabolically red, associated with sin and temptation. For the first few hundred years, eating them was considered morally wrong, not just dangerous, sinful. Tomatoes jumped the Atlantic again, heading to North America. American colonists got them from British settlers who brought them from Europe. Think about that journey. Tomatoes traveled from Mexico to Spain, Spain to Europe, Europe back to North America. A 3,000-mile detour to arrive 2,000 miles from where they started. Americans grew tomatoes, but rarely ate them. They appeared in gardens as ornamental plants. They didn't trust them. This brings us to one of the most famous stories in American food history. In September 1820, Colonel Robert Gibbon Johnson allegedly stood on courthouse steps in New Jersey holding a basket of tomatoes. A crowd gathered. Everyone expected him to die. Johnson ate the entire basket. He didn't die. Rumors spread across America. Maybe tomatoes were safe after all. Here's the problem. There are no records confirming it ever happened. No newspaper accounts. No eyewitness testimonies. The story only appeared decades later. Most historians believe it's a myth, but it represents a real turning point. By the 1820s, Americans were starting to eat tomatoes. Then a new terror emerged. A massive green worm invaded tomato patches, 3 to 4 inches long with a curved horn on its back. Americans called it the tomato hornworm. They were convinced it was deadly poisonous. Agricultural journals warned that merely brushing against it could result in death. This panic delayed tomato acceptance for another generation. Southern Italy in the 1800s was desperately poor. Peasants survived on what they could grow: vegetables, olive oil, bread, polenta, mostly vegetarian by necessity. Tomatoes thrived in southern Italy's climate. They were cheap, easy to grow, and once Italians figured out how to cook them, they were delicious. Tomatoes added acidity, sweetness, and richness to poverty food. By the late 1700s, southern Italian cooks were using tomatoes regularly. Then, in the 1800s, someone finally did it. They put tomato sauce on pasta. The first recorded recipe for pasta al pomodoro appeared in Naples. This was the moment everything changed. pasta and tomatoes, two ingredients that existed separately for millennia, finally united. The birth of modern Italian cuisine. But the legend that sealed tomatoes into Italian identity happened in June 1889. Queen Margherita of Savoy visits Naples. A local pizzaiolo named Raffaele Esposito creates a pizza featuring the colors of the Italian flag: red tomato, white mozzarella, green basil. The Queen loves it. It's named Pizza Margherita, but this combination wasn't new. Records from 1796 show pizzas with this exact topping. Esposito didn't invent it, but he linked tomato-based pizza to Italian national identity through the Queen. It became a symbol. When Italians emigrated to America in massive waves, they brought tomatoes with them. Foods we think of as traditionally Italian, spaghetti with red sauce, chicken parmesan, were largely developed by Italian Americans. Meanwhile, tomatoes spread everywhere. Spanish colonies introduced them to Asia. European colonial powers brought them to Africa. By the early 1900s, tomatoes had conquered the world. Today, tomatoes are the second most consumed vegetable in America. Global production exceeds 170 million tons annually. The food Europeans feared for 2 centuries is now a multi-billion-dollar global industry. But here's the mind-blowing part. In Mexico City, farmers are reviving chinampas, those ancient Aztec floating gardens. During the coronavirus pandemic, these 600-year-old plots helped feed 22 million people when modern supply chains failed. They still yield 7 harvests per year. They still grow tomatoes exactly as Aztecs did. Meanwhile, food scientists are recreating ancient Roman garum. Archaeologists analyzed residue from 2,000-year-old amphoras. Using those chemical signatures, they've successfully recreated the sauce. Romans would recognize it. We can now taste what Romans tasted and grow tomatoes using methods that predate Rome. Ancient and modern food systems exist side by side. Why didn't ancient Romans eat tomatoes? They couldn't. Tomatoes grew exclusively in the Americas until 1500. Romans had no access. Zero. But the real shock is what happened after. For over 200 years, Europeans believed tomatoes were poisonous. They had legitimate reasons. Tomatoes belong to the nightshade family. They resemble poisonous plants. Wealthy people died after eating them. It took Italian peasants, desperate, hungry, and willing to experiment, to unlock their potential. The next time you eat pasta with tomato sauce, remember this: you're eating a dish that's only 200 years old. You're tasting the result of centuries of fear and the bravery of poor Italian families who were hungry enough to try something everyone said would kill them. Food isn't just food. It's history, culture, survival, and transformation. And every bite tells a story.